The first time Everett Cole saw her, she was running. Her dress was torn, her face bruised, and her bare feet kicked up dust along the edge of a dry creek bed. The sun hadn't yet climbed above the ridge, and already the world felt like it was on fire. Everett was heading back from the south pasture with a bale of wire and 2 tired mules when she stumbled into the open, clutching her ribs. He pulled hard on the reins. She looked up, startled, feral, ready to bolt. He raised both hands slowly. "Easy now." The girl didn't speak, just stared with wide, red-rimmed eyes. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of wind and one panicked breath after another. Then she collapsed. By the time Everett lifted her onto his horse and rode the mile back to his ranch, she'd passed out cold. Her hands were shaking even in sleep. Her arms bore fresh bruises and old scars. Her bottom lip was split. She couldn't have been more than 17. He set her down on the old cot in the barn, covered her with a wool blanket, and waited. Everett Cole wasn't used to company. His wife, Clara, had passed 2 winters ago. Consumption took her before the snow thawed, and the silence she left behind had never quite settled. Since then, Everett kept to his ranch, to his work, and to the quiet. But this girl changed something. She woke just before dusk. Everett was leaning against a support beam with a cup of coffee in hand. The lantern burned low. She sat up fast, eyes wild. Where am I?" "You're safe," he said. "My ranch, about an hour out from Alder Creek." Her fingers twisted the blanket. "You shouldn't have brought me here." "You collapsed in the dust. Wasn't about to leave you there." She looked at him, eyes narrowed with something between fear and shame. "What's your name?" Everett asked gently. She hesitated, then barely audible. "June." He nodded. "All right, June, you want water or food first?" She didn't answer, but she didn't run either. That night, she barely touched the stew he brought her, but she drank the water like it was life itself. She didn't speak again until he turned to leave. "I wasn't going to make it," she said softly. "Not much further." He paused at the door, looking back. "I know. He left the barn door unlatched that night, just in case." But when he returned at sunrise, she was still there, sitting upright, wrapped in the blanket, staring out at the pasture like she didn't know what to do with freedom. And Everett realized then he hadn't just taken in a girl on the run. He'd found someone whose life had only just begun. June didn't ask for help, even when her bruises darkened, even when her ribs ached from breathing, even when the nightmares made her cry out into the darkness of the barn. She stayed quiet, watching, waiting, like a wild thing unsure if the world would hurt her again. Everett kept his distance at first. He brought her meals, never pressed her to eat, but always left food nearby. He fixed up a corner of the barn with hay bales stacked for privacy, an old quilt from the house, and a small oil lamp with a new wick. He didn't ask questions, didn't ask where she came from, or who she was running from. He figured she'd tell him when she was ready. On the 4th morning, Everett found her by the fence, staring out over the pasture with arms crossed tight against her chest. "You don't have to stay," she said without turning around. "I know," he replied, "but you do." She blinked at that, then looked at him, testing his words. He added, "Until you are strong enough to leave on your own terms." June glanced at the horizon. "What if I don't know where to go?" "Then you stay till you do." She helped around the ranch after that, quietly, carefully. She washed dishes, swept the porch, and mended an old saddle with stitches so neat Everett blinked twice. "You sew?" he asked one evening. She shrugged. "Used to fix everything myself. Easier than getting permission." He didn't press her, but every word she shared felt like a gift. That night, June sat on the porch steps, knees pulled to her chest, watching the sky bleed into twilight. Everett brought her a tin cup of warm tea and sat beside her without saying anything. After a while, she whispered, "He's not my real father." Everett turned his head slowly. June didn't look at him. "He married my mama 3 years ago. When she died, things got bad, then worse." She paused. "I ran because he stopped pretending to be angry. He just got quiet." Everett swallowed hard, then said, "You did the right thing." The next morning, June woke to find a small wooden crate outside the barn. Inside, a new dress, a bar of lavender soap, and a brush. No note, just care. And in that small kindness, she realized something. This wasn't just shelter. This was the start of something else. June wore the dress that day, not because she needed to, not because Everett asked, but because for the first time in years, she wanted to feel like something other than someone escaping. It was simple. Light blue with faded flowers along the hem, but it fit her just right. And when she stepped out onto the porch, Everett looked up from fixing a bridle and blinked. She flushed under his gaze. "You didn't have to do this," she said. He nodded. "I know," but he didn't look away. The days grew longer. June's bruises faded, but the caution in her eyes lingered. She moved through the ranch like someone testing each floorboard before trusting it wouldn't give way. But slowly, so slowly, she began to settle. She started humming when she swept the porch. She laughed once when the old mule sneezed hay into Everett's face. She braided her hair again, something she hadn't done since before her mother died. And Everett, he noticed it all. One night, lightning flashed across the ridge. June woke screaming. She didn't mean to. The storm had pulled her back to another night, another voice shouting in a cabin too small, fists pounding, silence after. Everett was there within seconds, holding the lantern low so it didn't blind her. She sat up, chest heaving. He didn't ask what happened. He just handed her the quilt that had fallen to the floor and said, "You're safe." She looked at him like she wasn't sure what that meant, but she believed him. Maybe not completely, but enough to sleep again. In town, people had started talking. A few men nodded to Everett differently now. The widow who ran the mercantile raised an eyebrow when he bought a second toothbrush. The postman made a joke about starting over, which Everett ignored. He didn't care what they thought, but he did notice that June had stopped flinching when she heard footsteps. And once, just once, he caught her watching him across the yard. Not scared, not guarded, just curious, like she was trying to figure out if a man could live this gently and still mean it. That evening, she brought him coffee. Not just poured it, but brought it. Set it down by his hand and said, "Thank you." He looked at her, his voice low. "You don't have to thank me." "I know," she whispered, "but I want to." And for the first time in a long while, Everett Cole let himself hope. Hope that maybe he hadn't just saved a girl from a cruel man. Maybe she was saving him too, from a life gone too quiet for too long. Fall crept in slow that year. The days turned crisp, and the nights carried the scent of wood smoke and coming frost. Trees blushed gold along the ridge, and the wind whispered change through the tall grass. June stayed, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she didn't want to leave. One morning, Everett returned from checking the northern fence line to find June on the porch, sleeves rolled up, baking something. "You're using the stove?" he asked, amused. She smirked. "I figured it out, mostly." He raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" June held up her hands, palms flour-dusted. "Depends how much you value your eyebrows." That afternoon they shared biscuits on the porch. They were lumpy, a little undercooked, but they tasted like effort and laughter. Everett bit into one, winced, then smiled anyway. "You're kind," she said suddenly. He glanced over. "I'm just a man who didn't look the other way." "No," she said firmly. "It's more than that. You see people, even when they're trying not to be seen." Everett didn't know how to answer that, so he said nothing. And that silence said everything. A few days later, June asked if she could ride out with him. Everett hesitated, then saddled the old mare for her and gave her the reins. She was quiet at first, letting the horse pick its pace. But after a mile, she relaxed into the rhythm. The hills opened up before them like pages in a book, the wind tangling her hair, the sun warming her cheeks. "I used to dream about this," she said. "Freedom, riding like this." Everett looked at her. "You're not dreaming now." "No," she whispered. "I'm not." They stopped near the ridge overlooking the valley. Everett handed her his canteen. She drank slowly, staring at the horizon. "You ever think about starting over?" she asked. He gave a half smile. "That's all I've been doing for 2 years." She looked at him, eyes searching. "Do you ever think you'll stop missing her?" He didn't flinch. "No, but I don't think she'd want me stuck in the past." June nodded. "My mama wouldn't either." They didn't speak for a while after that. They didn't need to. That night, Everett found a folded piece of paper on the table. June's handwriting was neat but tentative. "I'm not the same girl who ran barefoot into your pasture. I still carry the weight of where I came from, but it's lighter now. You gave me space to breathe, and I finally believe I deserve it." He read it twice, then sat down and stared out the window as stars began to blink into view, feeling something shift inside him, something tender, something new. The first snow came early, just a light dusting, barely more than a whisper on the ground, but enough to turn the landscape into something still and silver. June stood at the kitchen window with a mug in her hands, watching it fall. Everett came in from the barn, brushing flakes off his shoulders. "You'd think you'd never seen snow before," he teased gently. "Not like this," she said. "Not where I felt safe enough to stand still and watch it." Everett didn't say anything, but the quiet between them felt warm. They prepared for winter together. June stacked firewood with surprising strength. Everett patched the roof of the chicken coop while she fed the hens. At night, she read from old books by the stove while he whittled. Just being in the same room was enough. One evening, she asked, "Why do you keep so many empty chairs in the house?" Everett looked at her, surprised by the question. He shrugged. "Habit, I guess. Clara always believed in being ready for guests." June nodded, her gaze drifting toward the hearth. Maybe it's time to stop setting the table for ghosts. The words landed gently but deeply, and Everett heard them more as a question than a statement. That week, she carved her name into the back fence. Not for attention, not to leave, but to say she was there. To claim her space, Everett found the carving by accident. A quiet little June, in careful block letters beside the date. He traced it with one calloused finger and didn't speak of it. But he added a second name beside it the next day, Clara. Then underneath a third, Everett. One morning they walked the ridge together, wrapped in scarves and wool. June pointed to a deer in the distance, a blur of motion against the snow-dusted trees. "You ever think animals feel peace?" she asked softly. "I think they know when they're not being hunted," he replied. She nodded slowly. "Then maybe this is peace." That night, June brought him a small wrapped bundle tied with string. Inside, a hand-stitched leather pouch, rough but well-made. "For your pocket," she said, "so you don't keep your grief so close to your heart." He looked at her, something old breaking apart in his chest. "I didn't know I was allowed to let go," he murmured. June smiled gently. "You're not letting go, you're just making room." Outside, snow began to fall again. But inside the ranch house, for the first time in years, it felt like spring might come early. Christmas approached like a whisper, soft and slow. June had never celebrated it without tension before, without flinching at the sound of raised voices or worrying if a thrown bottle would replace a wrapped gift. But here, at Everett's ranch, the holiday took on a quiet grace. There were no fancy decorations, no tree trimmed with store-bought ornaments, just a pine bough over the fireplace, the scent of cinnamon from an old tin of cookies, and two stockings, mismatched and worn, hung side by side. One evening, June asked, "Do you still talk to her, Clara?" Everett stirred his coffee. "Sometimes. Out loud when no one's around. Sometimes just in my head." June nodded. "I talk to Mama too, mostly when I don't know what to do." "Does it help?" "Sometimes it's like I already know what she'd say. I just need to hear it in my heart." Everett smiled faintly. "I think that's what love does. It keeps talking to us even after it's gone." On Christmas morning, Everett found a folded note under his coffee mug. June had written, "You built a quiet world here. A place where someone like me could remember how to breathe. Thank you for letting me stay long enough to want to." And beneath that, a tiny stitched flower tucked between the lines, a sign of something blooming. That afternoon, Everett gave her his own gift, a saddlebag, old but polished, with her initials burned carefully into the leather. "I thought you might want something of your own," he said. She blinked, touched the letters. "You think I'm staying that long?" He gave a half smile. "I'm hoping you will." Later they shared dinner by the fire. It was simple. Roasted chicken, potatoes, and a loaf of bread June had made herself. But to Everett, it felt like a feast. Afterward, they sat in silence as snow fell thick and slow outside. June looked at him, eyes soft. "I never believed a man could be kind without wanting something." Everett didn't flinch. "And now?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Now I think maybe you just wanted me to remember I'm worth kindness." He reached for her hand. Not fast, not desperate, just steady, and she let him take it. In that small cabin beneath the hush of snowfall, two wounded hearts found a quiet rhythm. Not yet love, not quite a promise, but something better than both. Hope. Winter deepened. Drifts lined the fences, and the horse's breath curled like smoke in the morning air. But inside the cabin, warmth took root in places that had long been cold. June didn't say much about her past anymore. Not because it didn't matter, but because she no longer had to explain it every day just to be seen. She moved through the ranch like it belonged to her, even if she hadn't said the words out loud. The way she cared for the animals, the way she swept the porch, the way she folded Everett's scarf when he left it crumpled by the door. It was all quiet ownership. One morning, Everett woke to find her already outside, a blanket over her shoulders and boots crunching lightly through the snow. She stood at the edge of the pasture, watching the sunrise. "You always up this early?" he called gently from the porch. "Sometimes," she replied. "The world looks softer before it wakes up." He joined her, stepping into the silence beside her. "I used to think morning was the loneliest part of the day," she added. "Now I think it might be the bravest." Everett didn't ask what she meant. He just nodded, because he understood. That week, a letter arrived from the sheriff in Pine Ridge. Everett read it twice before he told her. Her stepfather had been arrested on a separate matter. Assault. A neighbor who finally reported him. "He's not coming after you," Everett said quietly. June looked at the folded letter in his hands, then walked over to the stove and added another log to the fire. "That man's not who I worry about anymore," she said. Everett waited. "I worry about becoming like him," she admitted. "So angry at the world that I forget how to live in it." He crossed the room, steady and sure. "You're not him," he said. You never will be. You've built too much light in here to be swallowed by his shadow. Her eyes brimmed, not from sadness, but from relief. That night, Everett asked if she wanted to ride out with him the next day. Just to the ridge and back. She nodded. I'd like that. Then added with a shy smile, but you have to let me race you this time. He grinned. You planning to win? I'm planning to remember what it feels like to fly. They rode side by side that morning. The cold bit their cheeks, but neither cared. The horses moved fast, kicking up snow, hearts beating in rhythm with hooves against frozen earth. For the first time in a long time, June laughed, deep, breathless, wind-tangled. She didn't just feel free, she felt alive. At the ridge, they dismounted and let the horses graze. The view was breathtaking. Snow-covered hills rolling into the horizon, trees iced in silver, sky pale and endless. June stood at the edge, arms spread slightly, like she could take it all in. Everett watched her from behind. You're not who you were when you got here, he said. She turned slowly. I know, but it scares me sometimes. What if this version of me disappears? It won't, he said firmly. You earned her. They sat down beneath the pine, sharing biscuits from Everett's saddlebag. June brushed crumbs from her lap. Do you ever think about what comes next? Everett nodded, thoughtful. Used to scare me. Now I think maybe it doesn't have to. She glanced at him. Because of me? He met her eyes. Because of us. Back at the cabin, she took down the extra stocking from the mantel, the one Clara used to hang. Do you mind? She asked gently. He shook his head. No, it's time. In its place, she hung a new one. Empty for now, but ready. That night, they sat close by the fire. He read from an old, worn book, and she stitched a button back onto his coat. No grand declarations, no sudden passion, just the soft steadiness of people learning to be whole, together. As the fire dimmed, June whispered, Thank you for seeing me when I didn't know how to be seen. Everett took her hand. Thank you for staying. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for the first time, neither of them felt like they were carrying the past alone. Spring came in slow exhales. The snow melted first at the edges of the fences, revealing stubborn green shoots. Birds returned to the trees. The creek behind the cabin, silent all winter, began to murmur again. Everett noticed how June's hair caught the sunlight now, how her face, once guarded and tight, had softened with peace she didn't even realize she'd earned. One morning, she brought in a basket of early herbs from the woods. Wild mint, she said proudly. And something that might be lavender or poison. Everett grinned. Let's let the chickens test it first. She rolled her eyes, but she laughed. Laughter had become normal now. So had brushing shoulders in the kitchen. So had silence that didn't feel empty. Later that week, Everett took her to town. It was the first time she'd returned since escaping that dark past. Her hands trembled a little on the ride in, but she held her head high. People looked. Some recognized her. She expected judgment. Instead, she got nods, a few smiles. Even an old woman pressed a hand to hers and whispered, Glad you're safe now, dear. June didn't cry right then, but in the quiet of the barn that night, she wept in Everett's arms. Grief, yes, but also release. Then came the day Everett showed her the box. It was small and old, covered in dust, buried in the top of his closet. Inside, Clara's wedding ring. He placed it on the table. I've been holding on to it for too long, he said quietly. June said nothing. I don't want you to wear this, he added. That would be wrong. But I want you to know, I'm not in love with a ghost anymore. She swallowed. And what are you in love with? He stepped closer. You. They didn't kiss that night, but when he touched her cheek, she leaned into it like it was something sacred. And when she smiled, it wasn't timid or unsure. It was a yes. The days grew longer. Light lingered on the porch steps and filtered golden through the kitchen window. June spent more time in the garden, her hands deep in soil, her laughter more frequent, her voice stronger. Everett noticed the change, not just in her, but in himself. He wasn't watching the clock anymore. He wasn't waiting for the pain to pass. He was living. One Sunday afternoon, while fixing the gate, June looked up and said, I never thought I'd find joy in mending fences. Everett chuckled. That's because most people only notice fences when they're broken. She tilted her head. Maybe people are the same. He paused. Maybe you're right. The town's spring festival arrived in late April. June hesitated at first. Crowds still made her wary, but Everett asked gently, Will you come? Just to walk with me? She nodded, and when they arrived, hand in hand, people didn't whisper. They waved. Children ran past them with ribbons, and music drifted through the air. Someone handed June a daisy chain. She smiled wide and wore it like a crown. Everett looked at her with awe, as if seeing her for the first time. You belong here, he said. June turned to him, her voice steady. So do you. That night, On the porch beneath the stars, Everett held her hand and said, "I don't know what the future holds, but if I could choose it, it would be you and me. Waking up in this cabin, feeding the animals, planting things that outlive us." June leaned into him. "That sounds like the only kind of forever I've ever wanted." And this time, when their lips met, it was slow, sure, and full of every word they hadn't yet spoken aloud. Inside the cabin, the old walls held them like a memory that didn't hurt anymore. They were no longer survivors clinging to what was lost. They were builders, dreamers, family. Summer arrived with its own kind of promise. The garden flourished. Rows of green beans, squash, and tomatoes bursting under June's careful tending. Chickens clucked contentedly in the yard. Everett repaired the barn roof, and June painted the front porch with a bright, hopeful blue. It wasn't just a home now. It was theirs. One quiet evening, June stood barefoot on the porch, a mug of tea in her hands, watching the sun melt into the hills. Everett joined her, wiping his hands on a rag, fresh from tending the horses. "I've been thinking," she said softly. "Dangerous habit," he teased. She smiled. "Maybe it's time to open that spare room." He blinked, uncertain. "You mean?" June nodded, a small but steady fire in her gaze. "I want to help girls like me. Ones who have nowhere to go, who need a place to remember how to breathe." Everett was quiet, the wind rustling through the tall grass below them. Finally he spoke. "If anyone can give them that, it's you." They started small. June cleaned out the old storage room, added a fresh coat of paint, hung lace curtains. Everett built a second bunk with his own hands. By late summer, the first girl arrived. Her name was Lila, 17, thin as a whisper, eyes wide with distrust. June didn't press her. She just left a warm blanket on the bed, a book on the nightstand, and a note. "You are safe here. You don't owe anyone your pain. Just rest. Just be." Lila didn't speak for 3 days. Then one afternoon, Everett found her sitting on the porch next to June, stringing wildflowers into a crown. She wore it crooked, but she wore it. That night, Everett said to June, "You're not just healing, you're helping others heal." She looked at him, tears quietly gathering. "So are you." They stood in the doorway of the cabin, listening to laughter drift from inside. And in that moment, Everett realized this wasn't just the life he hadn't expected. It was the life he never knew he deserved. By early autumn, the ranch was no longer a place of silence. It echoed with new voices, cautious steps, and tentative laughter. After Lila came Marta, then a quiet boy named Jonah, who hadn't spoken since losing his mother. June never turned anyone away. She welcomed them like the wind welcomes leaves in fall, softly, without question. Everett built more beds, reinforced the barn, expanded the chicken coop, and through it all, he and June remained steady. Not perfect, not without wounds, but steady. One afternoon, Everett returned from the pasture and found June teaching Lila to cook cornbread. Her hands moved gently over the flour, her words patient. Lila's brow furrowed in concentration, but when the loaf came out golden and warm, she beamed. "Let her keep the recipe," June said later. "Sometimes food remembers what the heart forgets." That evening, the old preacher from town stopped by. He sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, glancing around at the noise and warmth and life. "You've built something good here," he said, "but folks are talking." Everett stiffened. "What kind of talk?" "Good talk," the preacher smiled. "They're calling it the Healing House. Some even want to help, donate supplies, lend hands." June looked down, quiet. "I didn't mean to make this a mission." The preacher nodded. "That's exactly why it's working." Later that night, Everett stepped out into the chilly dusk. The stars were just starting to appear, scattered like seeds across the sky. June joined him, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. "You worried it's growing too fast?" he asked. She shook her head. "I'm just scared I'll fail them, that I'm not enough." He reached for her hand. "You don't have to be everything. You just have to be real." She exhaled, then leaned her head on his shoulder. And for the first time, she believed him. They stood in silence, watching a new fire kindle in the cabin hearth. Not just warmth, hope. The first frost came early. Morning light shimmered on silver grass, and the windows of the cabin fogged with breath and stew. Inside, the children huddled near the fire, while June wrapped scarves around their necks and Everett mended a broken latch on the barn door. Even the cold couldn't stop what they were building. This place, once a refuge for two, had become a sanctuary for many. One night, Lila had a nightmare. June found her standing outside barefoot in the frost, eyes wide with panic. Without a word, she draped her shawl over the girl's shoulders and guided her back inside. She didn't say, "You're safe." She didn't ask what happened. She just lit a lantern and sat with her until morning. Weeks later, Lila came to her with a drawing. It showed a cabin, A woman holding a child's hand, a man chopping wood, a heart above the chimney. On the bottom she had written, "Thank you for not giving up on me." June pressed the drawing to her chest and wept. Meanwhile, Everett wrestled with something quieter, deeper. He wanted to ask June something real, but he hesitated. Not out of fear she'd say no, but because he didn't want to rush her. After everything she'd endured, she deserved patience. Still, every time he looked at her laughing with the children or kneeling in the garden or singing softly as she sewed, he knew. He didn't just want her in his home. He wanted her in his name. One crisp afternoon, Everett took her on a walk through the pines behind the cabin. They followed a trail lit with golden leaves and scattered sunlight. At a clearing, he stopped, pulled something small from his coat pocket. Not a ring, a key to the attic room he'd renovated quietly. A space she could make entirely hers. "I know you never had a place of your own. Now you do," he said. "Whether or not you ever take my name." June looked down at the key, then up at him, and in that soft October light she whispered, "I already carry your name, Everett, in how you treat me, in how you've loved these kids, in how you waited." "Oh," she closed his hand over hers. "I'm ready." The wedding was small, no fanfare, no lace-lined chapel, just a quiet grove behind the cabin, the scent of pine in the breeze, and a circle of souls who had once been strangers but had become something sacred. Family. Marta carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Lila braided June's hair, her fingers trembling with joy. Jonah stood beside Everett, holding the wooden ring box he had carved himself. And when June stepped out in her simple ivory dress, barefoot on the forest floor, Everett forgot how to breathe. They didn't exchange elaborate vows. June looked into Everett's eyes and said, "I came here with nothing. No voice, no home, no faith in kindness. But you gave me space to grow. You didn't fix me. You believed I could heal." Everett took her hands in his. "You showed me grief doesn't end, it changes. You taught me that love isn't found, it's built. Slowly, gently, honestly." And with only the trees as witnesses, they sealed a promise. Not of perfection, but of presence. Later that night, around the fire, the children took turns telling stories. Some were funny, some were hard. All of them were honest. When it was June's turn, she held up the drawing Lila had once made. "This," she said, "is what healing looks like. It's messy, it's slow, but it's real." Everett wrapped his arm around her. "And it's ours." That winter the ranch thrived. Snow covered the fields, but inside the cabin there was music, warmth, and bread in the oven. They took in 2 more children. Everett started building a new wing. June taught the girls to knit, the boys to carve. Sometimes at night, Everett and June would sit on the porch under wool blankets, listening to the hush of snow falling on pine. "I used to think love was something you fall into," she once whispered. Everett turned to her, smiling. "And now? Now I know it's something you rise into, together." Spring returned like a quiet blessing. Crocuses bloomed beneath melting snowbanks, and the orchard trees, long dormant, blushed with the first signs of life. The ranch stirred with the sounds of goats, laughter, and hammering as Everett finished the addition to the house. More beds, more space, more room for healing. But something else had changed too, something deeper. One evening, as Everett helped Jonah saddle the old mare, the boy looked up and asked, "Do I get to stay forever?" Everett's hands stilled on the leather straps. "You already are," he said, voice low. "You're not just passing through, son. You belong here." Jonah blinked fast, but didn't cry. He just nodded. And then, unprompted, he hugged Everett tight. That night, Everett told June. She listened quietly, then whispered, "They're starting to believe love won't leave." He looked at her across the firelight. "Because we didn't." Word about their ranch began to spread, not in loud headlines or posters, but through whispers of hope. Women wrote letters. Men stopped by asking how they could help. An old midwife donated linens. A traveling carpenter offered his hands for free. No one called it a shelter. They called it a beginning. One Sunday, June stood before the children in the clearing where she and Everett had wed. She held a small wooden sign that read, "Welcome home, you're safe, you're wanted." She drove it into the earth with a small hammer, and every child took a turn placing a rock at its base. A ritual, a declaration. That night, as they sat on the porch watching lightning bugs dance over the fields, June rested her head on Everett's shoulder and said, "I used to pray for a place to disappear." He kissed her knuckles gently. "And now? Now I pray they'll find us, before the dark does." He didn't speak. He just held her hand and promised, in the language of presence, that they would always keep the light on. Summer came with golden fields and the hum of bees drifting lazily through the tall grass. But it wasn't just the weather that warmed the land. It was the steady beat of hearts healing under one roof. The ranch was now home to 11 children, 2 goats, a rooster with a limp, and more laughter than June ever thought possible. But with growth came new challenges. And one afternoon a letter arrived that would change everything. It was from a distant cousin of Everett's, someone he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. The words were polite but firm. A local official was questioning the legitimacy of their home. Too many people, not enough permits. Whispers of unfit conditions. Everett stood in the yard gripping the paper, jaw tight. June approached, reading his expression before reading the letter. "They want to shut us down," he said, voice low. "No," June whispered, "they can't." But the truth was they could. That evening, after the children were asleep, Everett paced the porch while June sat with her hands folded in her lap. "I never wanted to make this place public," he muttered. "Didn't want eyes on us. Didn't want interference." June looked up, eyes steady. "Then maybe it's time we stop hiding. Maybe it's time we show them what this place really is." The next day they opened the gates, invited the townsfolk, baked pies, hung quilts from the porch. Lila led garden tours. Jonah showed how he helped build the coop. Marta sang songs on the fiddle. And when a county inspector showed up, clipboard in hand, he found a home, not a facility. He found family, not disorder. And most of all, he found truth. He stood quietly beside Everett as June read a story aloud under the oak tree. "You know," the man said, "we don't usually make exceptions." Everett raised an eyebrow. "But," the man tucked his clipboard away, "but some places aren't made to fit rules. Sometimes the rules need to stretch." That night, the children asked if they were safe. And for the first time in a long time, Everett didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said, "you're safe. No one's taking this from us." And as June knelt beside him, wrapping her arm around his waist, he realized the battles he once fought in silence, he no longer fought alone. Autumn came again, as it always did. Quiet and slow, like a letter from an old friend. The trees burned orange and gold. The fields glowed amber. And life at the ranch settled into something deeper than routine. It became rooted. Children now called the place home without hesitation. Chickens wandered freely. A new garden patch grew with the help of curious little hands. And Everett and June, though still tired most days, found joy in the daily choosing of each other. One late afternoon, June was mending shirts by the fire when she noticed Marta quietly staring into the flames. "You all right?" she asked softly. Marta hesitated. "It's almost been 2 years." "Since what, honey?" "Since I ran." June set down the needle. "Would you like to talk about it?" Marta nodded, then began, halting, quiet. A story about locked rooms, raised voices, bruises no one saw. The way she carried shame like a coat stitched from silence. And then, how she'd stumbled into this place never expecting to be wanted, let alone loved. When Marta finished, June didn't offer cliches. She simply wrapped her arms around the girl and whispered, "It wasn't your fault. And you are more than what happened to you." That night, Marta sang for the first time. A trembling lullaby full of broken notes and raw courage. No one interrupted, not even Everett, who stood by the doorway, hand over his heart. Meanwhile, Everett had begun carving a large wooden sign for the gate. He worked on it quietly every evening after supper. No one knew what it would say, until one morning they all gathered as he lifted it into place. Burned into the wood were the words, "The Hearthlight Ranch, where the lost become loved." June stood beside him, her hand in his. And in the wind, as the leaves fell around them like blessings, Everett whispered, "You gave this place its name, not with words, but with who you are." She smiled. "And you gave it its strength." They didn't need to say "I love you" out loud that day. It was already carved into everything around them. That winter was the harshest in years. Snow came early and thick, cutting off the ranch from town for nearly 2 weeks. The power flickered, the firewood ran low, and for a moment, even Everett, strong, steady Everett, felt fear creep in like frost beneath the door. But something had changed. They weren't the same people who once survived alone. They had become a village. Jonah and Marta took shifts stoking the fires. Lila and June canned preserves late into the night. Everett taught the boys how to pack snow against the walls of the chicken coop for insulation, while June crafted wool socks for every child from yarn gifted by a neighbor. They didn't just endure the storm, they made a life inside it. One night, as sleet rattled the windows and the winds howled like wolves, June woke to find Everett sitting at the table, staring at a letter he hadn't shown her. She walked over, took his hand without asking. "It's from someone who hurt me," he said simply. "My father." June's breath caught, but she said nothing. "He wants to come to make amends." June squeezed his hand. "You don't owe anyone a second chance, Everett, but you deserve the right to choose." He looked at her, weathered, wiser now, and nodded. Maybe it's time I stopped running from ghosts. A week later, Everett met his father at the edge of town. The man was older than he remembered, more hollow, less cruel. He didn't cry. He didn't plead. He simply said, "I see what you've built. I couldn't have done it, but I'm glad you did." Everett didn't offer forgiveness, not that day. But he didn't walk away either. Sometimes, healing meant letting silence carry the weight that words couldn't. When Everett returned home, June was waiting on the porch. He didn't speak, just pulled her into his arms. And in the hush between their heartbeats, she understood. The storm outside was fierce, but the storm within had finally passed. Spring thaw came slowly that year, as if the land itself was still learning how to breathe again. But when the ice finally gave way, wildflowers bloomed more fiercely than ever. The fields, once white with silence, now pulsed with color: yellow buttercups, blue flax, deep red Indian paintbrush. It was as if the earth had remembered joy, and so had they. June stood by the new garden beds with Marta and Lila, watching tiny sprouts push through soil. "See that?" she said softly. "Things can grow even after the cold." The girls exchanged a look, one that said they understood more than June would ever know. Inside the house, Everett sat beside Jonah, guiding his hands as he carved the finishing edge of a wooden cradle. It wasn't for a baby they had, not yet, but for the hope that one day they might. "You think she'd like this?" Jonah asked. Everett smiled. "If she's anything like the others in this house, she'll try to eat the wood before she sleeps in it." Jonah laughed, a full, easy sound. It was a sound that once didn't exist here. Later that week, June received a letter from a girl she once met at a trading post, a girl who had seen the flyer pinned to the general store's board. "Hearthlight Ranch, where the lost become loved." The letter was brief. "I have nowhere else to go, but I want to live. I want to become." June showed it to Everett. He nodded. "Then she has a home." They fixed up the old milk shed, added new quilts, painted the door blue. Lila placed a potted flower by the window. Jonah hung one of his carvings above the bed, a bird flying out of a broken cage. "She's going to need time," June warned gently. Everett squeezed her hand. We all did. That night, under the stars, June rested her head on Everett's chest. "Do you think we're done?" she whispered. He looked out at the flickering windows, the whisper of laughter, the sound of chickens settling in for the night. "No," he said. "I think we're just getting started." Years passed, not in a blur, but in chapters, each one richer than the last. Hearthlight Ranch became more than a home. It became a refuge, a school, a sanctuary stitched together with second chances and quiet miracles. Children came, some stayed, others moved on, but none ever truly left. They carried the warmth with them, like a lantern lit from one central fire. Jonah built furniture now, real beautiful things, tables and rocking chairs and cradles that told stories in their curves and grain. Marta became a midwife, the kind who could calm storms with her voice. Lila, quiet and steady, opened a small library in the old hayloft. She called it the Loft of Lost Things Found. And June taught the little ones how to breathe through nightmares and sing through scars. Everett aged, not in sorrow, but in peace. His hands were slower, but his heart fuller. When he walked the fences in the evening light, he did so with a cane carved from the branch of the very tree they had wed beneath. And June? She never stopped wearing wildflowers in her hair. One clear autumn morning, a little girl tugged on Everett's coat. "Is it true?" she asked. "What's that?" "That you were sad once, before all this." Everett crouched slowly, meeting her eyes. "I was more than sad, I was empty." "What changed?" He smiled. "Someone taught me that love isn't something you wait for. It's something you build. With your hands, your heart, and your hope." The little girl blinked. "That sounds hard." "It is," he whispered. "But it's worth everything." And so it was that a lonely woodsman, once hollowed by loss, became the father of many, husband, friend, guide. The girl he'd saved had saved him in return. And together they'd proven something rare. That family isn't just who you're born to. It's who you choose to stand beside even when the trail breaks.